Open your eyes. Wake up, Link.
I'm Luke Summerhaze.
I'm James J. Miles.
And I'm James the Jaster Stewart.
And you're listening to Hyrule Field Report. Jas, what did we do last week?
And last week we made it out of from beneath the Hyrule Castle and dove our way down onto the Great Sky Island.
And on this week's edition of the report, we're going to be exploring the Great Sky Island, and we'll see how far we get through on this episode.
It's pretty big.
It's a hefty size. I did wonder, like, compared to the size of the Great Plateau, what the actual comparison would be. It feels about equivalent.
I
Maybe
think
slightly
if
bigger?
you were to go... Yeah, I'm wondering, if you were to go pure square footage, I wouldn't be surprised if the plateau's bigger. But you kind of have to do it in a big loop on the Great Sky Island. So it feels like one long walk, whereas the plateau, you're back and forth to those four
Sky
sides.
Island's obviously got caves and stuff like that as well. Like,
Yeah, that's
kind
true.
of
That's
the
true.
plateaus kind of, it's more just kind of open ended. There's not much to really explore.
Well, to start with, I think we left off last time. We were just heading to the Temple of Time. We get quite unlike anything we've ever seen called a Temple of Time before in a Zelda game. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, we kind of said last time it was this kind of strange monolith. I think I said it was like an inverted pyramid, which I went back and looked at it, and it definitely is like an inverted pyramid. It's a very strange Temple of Time. Certainly not, like you said, nothing we've seen before in Zelda, but very cool.
This is where you get like recall as well, right? For the first time? Am I remembering that
Not
right?
yet.
Not
but
yet.
yes. Yeah, so you go in there, there's a door you can't open. In a very... I think this is actually a kind of a deft bit of storytelling. You try to push the door open and it does the Master Sword draining your hearts thing.
Yeah, test of strength.
Yeah, so it's like the game telling you like Link has lost his strength.
Yep, he's been sapped by his clash with the eerie mummy below Hyrule Castle. Who could that be? But yes, he's like you said, it's a nice bit of storytelling. He's so withered that he doesn't have the vitality to even push open this heavy door in a sense. So yeah, it's cool. I dig it.
But then we can speak... Is this the first time we can actually speak to Rauru's spirit?
First time you see him, I think, yeah.
First time we see him, you hear him when you first awaken.
Right, that's it. We hear him as just a voice.
Yes. And when you first heard him, I thought like he was going to be speaking to us for the whole journey, like through the arm. Kind of like...
Yeah, like the hat in Minish Cap.
I just
the
realised
hat
as well,
or-
I got my Temple of Time doors mixed up between the entrance and exit.
there we go.
That's why I was confused.
But yeah, it kind of like Eslo. Is that the guy from Minish Cap?
Yeah, that was the hat, yeah.
And or Fee, obviously, or Midna, Navi. Like there's been a long history of companion characters in Zelda, right? And yeah, I thought we'd have a talking glowing arm for the whole journey, but no. But yeah, this is the first time we actually see what he looks like.
But it just like
we
Link,
see
anytime he talks, Link like loses control of the arm and it does the hand puppet for a mouth. Starts talking
That
to
would
you,
be great.
like South Park style.
Oh, I wish.
What's worse, having the ghost of an old king in your arm, or your own dead wife be your arm?
What's the second reference?
That's the that Bionic Commando remake from
Oh
10 years ago.
Jesus!
The big twist, I think, was that your wife was your arm.
I don't know. I think maybe having the younger brother of your mortal enemy as your arm, that might be a bad one as well.
Yep.
But yeah, like Rauru's design, we actually get a chance to properly see him for the first time here. We see obviously he's very similar to the Zonai constructs. He's a big goat man.
Yeah, it's a really cool creature.
Mm,
I don't know anything about later in the game, so don't spoil anything for me.
Mhm.
So far, he's the only Zonai I've actually seen,
right. Okay.
so I don't actually know that they all look like that. But I'm assuming that's just what his species looks like.
Did you clock what was like above his eyes?
Oh no, but I've seen a memory that lets me know later on.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, he has like basically what looks like at this stage like almost like just a Sheikah emblem above his eyes. And I was thinking, okay, maybe this is where the Sheikah derived their logo from. Essentially, is from Rauru and from the Zonai, which would make a lot of sense. Not that, just a little side point as well. Did you recognise Rauru's voice actor at all, Luke?
Oh no, I didn't actually. What's he done?
He's Dimitri from Fire Emblem Three Houses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, but yeah, just something I was like, I recognise that voice, and I had to look it up and clocked who it was.
Isn't
But
Matt Mercer, is that? Or
no, Matt
he
Mercer
something
plays
else?
another character that we'll speak about, I'm sure,
I just
later.
heard, I
Yes.
just heard that name somewhere.
Yeah. No, this guy's called Chris Hackney. I don't know if he's done much. I've not hired him out in anything else other than this and Fire Emblem, but he plays a good role. I like him. I like him as Rauru. Has that kind of dignified,
Yeah.
polite sort of air about him. Very regal.
Yeah, a very different kind of regal to the king from the first game,
Yeah.
who had that sort of booming, self-important voice, whereas this is more like a kind, gentle kind of leader.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, Rauru says, yeah, you need to get into the Temple of Time. I think he tells you... No, so the Constructor told you to meet Zelda in there, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because you get given the
And then-
Puripad from the construct and says Princess Zelda's up in the Temple Time. Got a chat, and then Rauru's like, "Oh, you can't actually open the door. We'll have to recover your energy," as he's made places that were filled with sacred energy, which are the shrines.
And then the camera twists a little bit, and as he's saying that, you see a shrine behind him. You're like, okay, I know how this works.
Yes.
And this is the moment where you realise the Great Sky Island is not going to be the same as the Great Plateau. Because he says that, the camera shows you that one shrine, and immediately I swung the camera around until I found another shrine. And I thought, right, I'm going to that one. And I just physically could not. So there was no way to climb up to the snowy...
Was it the snowy one? Yeah. So
Yeah.
before I even went to the Temple of Time, I actually went off exploring, and
Right.
I got I found some spicy peppers, and I found a cook pot.
Yep, I did the same thing.
And made myself a heat meal just to kind of begin climbing, and got fairly high up, but eventually I got to a point where, I mean, now knowing what I know about the game's functions, I may have been able to do it, but actually maybe not, because they would have had required. Anyway, I got pretty high up. I got to like a waterfall fairly close to the shrine at the top, but I just
abilities, right?
yeah, I think some of the climbing structures, because they're cold and icy, they're slippy. So
Yeah, they're covered in ice, so you can't climb up them.
that's it, and that kind of put an end to my little exploring session. I don't think the shrine was even active at this point when I went exploring. I just thought I'm going to go off and have a little walk. But yeah, as a tutorial area compared to the Great Plateau, it's not as freeform maybe as the Great Plateau is.
But I think that makes sense because what it needs to teach you is a bit more complicated.
Yeah, I think the powers, which we'll go into in a bit more detail.
I think as well, like they're trying to like kind of tie it in because if you look at the map, like it's now like obviously the whole tiers of the kingdom thing. You've seen the like logo, like it's kind of like a tier, but it's like a in the shape of like a 9. And that's what like the order you do the shrines in follows that same shape. So there's like a story
we'll talk
element
about
to
that shape in a bit when we see one because they're pretty significant.
But yeah, trying to brute force your way. I mean, there will be people that will have done it.
But spent like 6 to 10 hours doing it,
trying to figure out how to do it. Yeah, but the I suppose quote unquote intended way, and the way that the majority of people will have done is they will have taken a little walk to that shrine that was pointed out ever so helpfully by Rowdy, just very close to the Temple of Time, which is called the Ukko Shrine.
I think you could argue that what this game needs to teach you and what Breath of the Wild needed to teach you were different. Because Breath of the Wild, part of the point of the plateau was to teach you how much freedom you're going to have in this game. And
that's a point, yeah.
You can do it in any order and that there's multiple different ways to solve every problem and so on. Whereas I think they're assuming you know that coming into Tears of the Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a little more laser focused on teaching you the new mechanics.
And the new powers, as we'll go through the cast, they are a bit more a bit more fiddly to get to grips with than the powers, I think, in Breath of the Wild.
So we arrive at Ukko Shrine, and the challenge is called The Ability to Create.
Yes. Like, before we go into the actual shrine itself, like, what were your guys' takes on the actual design and I suppose the lore behind the shrines in this game compared to Breath of the Wild?
I'll tell you what, design-wise, the main thing is I really love the visual effect when you're looking through the door, and they're like TARDIS style, bigger on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
That is cool.
I like as well like, the fact that like just in general, like from a distance, they're like way more visible. Like because of the big glowing spiral colours,
yes.
like the green and blue. Like it's just, I found them like a lot easier to spot, like from a distance.
And I think what's cool as well is like Rowdy spoke about these shrines being, places he filled with sacred energy designed to keep evil under control. And if you remember that kind of spiral that you were on about there, Jas, do you remember where we saw that?
That was what was holding the mummy down right at the very start of the game, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Very same visual effect.
Yeah, it's what Zelda grabs as well, like when she falls to her doom.
Mm-hmm. So we see that kind of spiral above the shrines as well. And I like the idea that they're like pocket dimensions almost. The Sheikah shrines from Breath of the Wild obviously were little underground vaults, basically.
Yeah, you feel like the
elevator. Yeah, but these no such constraints. These are big old TARDISes, basically, like you said.
I'm with you, and all of that is cool, but in terms of like lore, my brain couldn't see it as anything other than here's an excuse to have shrines again.
I mean, I guess
fairly or unfairly, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Can't disagree with that.
Like, it's cool and I'm into it, but deep down I was just like, right, okay, sure. There, you've stored some light, have you? Okay.
But so we get the ability to create is the name of the challenge, like you said, in the Ukko Shrine, and we get given Ultra Hand.
Yes. We talked about this back in the first episode, I think, Ultra Hand being a little reference to very, very, very old Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
Literally a physical toy they made before they made games. And we also talked in the first episode about how I skipped through the instructions too quickly and didn't know half the buttons.
How are you finding Ultra Hand now that you know how to use it?
Well, we'll talk about it a little bit later, actually, because obviously I went and revisited the Great Sky Island to prep for this episode.
Mm.
And the bit where I had to like cross a river, I did it in like seconds, literal seconds. And what had taken me like an hour last time, it's just like bam, 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 slap together, go. So yeah, I mean, and I'm sure by the time I've played 130 hours like you have,
Let's whoa, let's come on, man. Let's be cool.
Like I'm sure you're smashing stuff together like a pro Fortnite player at this point.
I mean,
Jay always cranking the 90s. That's what they say, right?
You're more down with the kids than I am, clearly, Chance.
I thought cranking in the 90s meant like dancing to Eiffel 65.
That works as well, yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what they say for like building mechanics in Fortnite. That's what I've heard. I've never played the game.
There is definitely a bit of a learning curve though with Ultra Hand, and it is the most fiddly of the powers to get to grips with, I think. But the tools it affords you once you do, master that ability and begin thinking about ways you can glue stuff together, is the scope for what you can do with it is just insane, absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's something else.
Now, there was an interview with Aonuma fairly recently, I think, done by the Washington Post, I want to say. And he spoke about how when they were kind of designing the Ultra Hand ability, a big part of it came from, he's got a background in carpentry. And
I think I did know that, actually, yeah.
Yeah. And one thing he was saying in an interview is when they were designing the Ultra Hand ability, that the other members of the design team were talking about how you get the kind of green turquoisey glue that shows you where items are joined together.
Mm-hmm.
He was very much. Oh, you still here?
Yeah.
I heard a noise. I don't know what that was.
Yeah, it sounded like someone leaving or joining, but everyone seems to be here.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it was Craig, apparently. Weird.
Oh.
Okay, cut that.
Yeah, 1725.
Yeah. But yeah, he was talking about how the other members of the design team, they wanted that turquoisey glue to show quite easily to players where items are conjoined together. It just made for a more kind of readable and easier to use power, because otherwise it can be quite, you wouldn't really know where things were conjoining, and it'd be difficult to put things together. Having that piece of information on the screen was really important to the design of the power itself. Aonuma really had to kind of swallow a bit of carpenter's pride, and he was initially had to be convinced that this glue effect was good, because he mentioned, when you're but in his background is carpentry, that sort of like seeing glue like oozing out of
seeing the joints means it's not built properly. It's
not been done well. Yeah,
it's not been done well. It looks messy. You would normally like wipe the glue away, the excess glue, things like that. And
I do get his point, because I do look at the things I've made and think, oh, it looks a bit messy and gross, because you can see the overflowing glue and blue tack. But
I think when you start building bigger creations, though, I think it just adds to the charm to see all this stuff connected together, and you still see like the glue.
I think the power would not have worked without that glue effect.
They also have like that other little effect, right? It's like a small like yellow dot that shows you the anchor point of where you're actually connecting
when you're joining it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you're joining it, yeah.
That's particularly. I don't know how much Aonuma's sort of carpentry training is that traditional, but Japan has a lot of wooden structures. I think like most of the largest wooden structures on Earth are in Japan. And historical Japanese architecture doesn't even involve nails. They have these big, elaborate wooden temples just built by pieces that cleverly slot together.
Oh, okay.
So then it's all about this very pure aesthetic where you can't see how anything's joined.
So what you're saying is all the buildings in Japan, you can play a big, massive game of Jenga.
Yeah. But like a really complicated sort of Zack and Wiki version of Jenga.
What a reference,
man. That's because they do have to play
game.
a game of Jenga every few years because it either gets destroyed in an earthquake or burns down.
Yeah. But fortunately, the shrine isn't as doesn't ask you to make anything as convoluted as we might have been suggesting. You don't have to create any Japanese architecture here.
You don't have to build Metal Gear Rex.
You have to build the shrine itself.
Fortunately, the game, I think the first couple of obstacles is just moving a bridge, to moving a stone slab to make a bridge, gluing a couple of stone slabs together to make a longer bridge, and then starting to get you thinking a little bit outside the box. It's then got a hook on a rail, which you can attach a stone slab to and then ride the rail down to the end of the shrine. So it's a very gentle introduction. But one that's, I think it's necessary to not throw you in at the deep end to ask you to do some of the more complicated constructs that the game will ask you later on.
Well, we touched on this already, but the big difference here with the Great Plateau is you get out of this shrine, the game is nowhere near done teaching you how to use this power.
No, that's it. Like you when you're going through to the next shrine, there are more obstacles you'll have to do. I don't know if you want to jump onto that right away or.
I think we're done. We're done with the shrine, right?
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to point out about the shrine is the actual statue at the end. So before in Breath of the Wild, you had like a withered old Sheikah mummy, basically giving you an orb. This time, your blessing of light, as it's known, comes from a statue of Azonai, which you're kind of presuming is probably Rauru, and Hylian, what seems to be a Hylian woman standing next to him.
See, it obviously is going to tie into the story in a big way. But I did find it really cool in the in Breath of the Wild how you had, so those guys you would find in the shrines, those were basically dudes who'd mummified themselves. Which is a thing that used to happen in like Japanese Buddhism. If there was like a terrible famine was like striking the town or something, then like the way the like ultimate move a priest could do was they would basically seal themselves in a cube and self mummify. So every single one of those Sheikah like priests had sealed themselves in a cube and starved themselves to death to like seal their power away for you or whatever.
Presumably during a calamity of some sort, right?
Yeah, well, to prepare like for the hero in the next calamity.
But yeah, so that was the other point I wanted to mention about the shrine, was the statue.
Yeah. Well, one of them is clearly Rauru.
Yes.
Or at least clearly Azonai, I guess. Maybe you couldn't necessarily say it is Rauru at this point.
Sure, you probably think it was.
You can assume. It's easy to assume because that's the first Zona you see, right, is Rauru. So.
And he mentioned he created the shrines as well, right? So
yeah, and instilled the power in there. And then next to him is a Hylian woman, who I'm sure we will learn more about later on.
So moving forward, you kind of mentioned it there, Luke, that whilst we've now got Ultra Hand and we've done what you'd expect it to be the tutorial shrine, tutorial for Ultra Hand isn't really over, because to get to the next shrine, you have to continue using Ultra Hand and begin thinking about, more and more ways you can apply that power. to get over to our next shrine. So I think the first big obstacle, if I remember rightly, is there's a raft. But we
Yeah,
have to do
but
a bit of travelling to get to the river first. But you can see there's going to be a big body of water for us to cross.
Right outside the shrine is... So I guess this is optional. But there's another example of the zip line we made in the shrine. With the hook and like a metal rail. Where we can do our first pair of Koroks.
Yes. Now, what was... So my first Korok were not these two. I mentioned earlier about how I went on a big journey up the snowy mountain trying to find my way up, and I actually found a Korok, I think, hiding under a rock on my way up that mountain, and I had a visceral reaction when I first saw them of going, "No, not again, no." I mean, I know why they're back. It's a very easily sort of like fun, collectible little things you can do. But there was a little bit of
man,
dread.
my reaction was very different. So the first one I found was it was one of the ones where it's like a flower and you chase it and it pops somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Keep chasing it till the Korok pops out. And I was like, "Yay, they're back!"
Yeah, they're back.
The ones like were like the ones you meet by the zip line. Like those were the first ones I saw.
No, yeah, I think they're designed to be. Because that's also like the first ones. There's something different from Breath of the Wild.
Yes. I love these little guys. like the little... I just seen him with his little backpack and he's just like, I want to go get to my friend. Please help.
It's always fun coming up with like creative ways to kind of get them to their destination. Like, right, strap you to this little rocket device that I've made and shoot you across this river.
No! Poor little guy.
Oh, on a glider. He's safe.
Oh, he's safe. Okay, sure.
Not like the other heathens that you see online, like crucifying them.
Yeah, man, there's some real sick bastards out there that are just
I will say, see the Koroks that you find like under rocks? I'll always drop the rock on my head just to hear them go.
I usually do it by accident, but then sometimes I'll let the intrusive
always do it. It's just funny.
over.
They just go. Make that little noise is brilliant.
But these little backpack fellas, this is going to be a recurring Korok quest, I suppose you could say, that you'll find throughout the journey, where you'll find the tired little Korok with a backpack, and then he'll show you off in the distance a plume of smoke where his friend is camping out, and you've got to go in and get him over there. And the first one, like you said, looks kind of a repeat of the hook puzzle from the shrine.
Yeah, I just straight up like copied what I'd done in the shrine. Simple platform, hook on top of that, and it just like send them across. So I jumped on it with him, obviously make sure he got there safely. Yeah,
I went across with him too.
I actually didn't do this Korok until yesterday when I was revisiting the area for this podcast, because, as mentioned, I couldn't figure out the buttons and it was a pain in the butt.
Like, how do I rotate this hook? Impossible.
Yeah. Well, I was just dropping the hook on the rail until it hung, and then lifting the wood up to join the hook.
But these are really fun, and some of them genuinely have been that close, like later in the journey, where I have literally just picked the Korok up with Ultra Hand and just walked him over to his buddy. But some of them, they're like obviously over a canyon or maybe across a river, and you've got to think a bit outside the box about how you're going to get a little Korok fella to his destination.
They get really clever with it, like new elements. Like, it's not just like, oh, there's these friends that get in the distance, like you might be up the top of a cliff or something like that, and you need to figure out how to propel this little Korok up into the air.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, if you torture Koroks, I'm judging you. I'm judging you.
I'm
I'd say
judging
I
you,
torture them,
also
but
I
I've
have
done
seen-
the one I was just thinking of there, like to the top of a cliff. Like it took me ages to kind of figure out what to do, and tried to propel up with like an air balloon, and he did fall off at one point, but that was clearly accidental.
There was one clip I saw about a guy who was like genuinely trying to help the Korok, but the Korok he forgot to glue him to this like vehicle he made, and the Korok
slides away.
slid off as it gets worse, slid off, and then ended up bouncing down a chasm. Oh,
But then I've also seen some pretty funny stuff where people are putting like 6 Korants on a stick and roasting them over a spit and stuff.
it's
I saw
horrible.
that, yeah.
Oh. Especially like in lore, the Koroks are meant to be like the Kakiri, right?
Mm.
Just burning children.
I was actually watching a bit of a Twitch stream the other day, and the person was doing what you said, Jay, what you normally just using the Ultra Hand to kind of transport them, but along the way he was like, "Oh, oopsie daisy, I dropped you," and then he was bouncing it off a cliff, and then hitting recall, and then hitting recall to bounce it back up, and then catch him. Like, "Oh, sorry about that." It was pretty funny.
Oh.
I got to have a really great moment because my girlfriend, she's a fan of the Koroks because she liked them in Wind Waker, and like I gave her a little keyring of one or whatever, and then I did a little impression of the yahaha, and she's like, "Oh, I always see people writing yahaha, but I've never heard it." So I pulled up my game and like showed her. Well, I think I pulled up my stream of my first night on the game and showed her my first Korok, and she listened to the sound like 5 times in a row. It is very cute.
I always find myself saying it after I find one sometimes. Like, I always like, pick up a rock and go, yeah!
Yeah, it is an adorable little sound. I love
That's
it.
always the disappointment though, right? When you're like climbing a cliff and then you see a random rock, like there's a Korok under that, you lift it and then there's nothing.
No, it's just a rock. Sometimes a rock is just a rock.
Yep.
Yeah.
So on our way to the second shrine, we've also got a few enemies.
Yeah.
We fought a couple of constructs on the way to the Temple of Time.
Mm-hmm.
But we do a fair few, and a couple of them in like groups of 2 or 3. What do we think of these guys as an enemy to fight?
Yeah, I mean, they are a bit like this game's equivalent of the not the Guardians, obviously, but the Guardian. What were they called? The mini ones. You know, the ones I'm on.
The ones you would fight in shrines sometimes.
In shrines, yeah. This game's equivalent.
Kind of like you could easily just call them that, like kind of like mini Guardians, because they do have the same kind of multiple eyeball weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some more interesting. Well, there's a more interesting variety, which we'll speak about in a bit. But the basic soldier constructs, they're fine. They're mooks, right?
Yeah, at least there's a little variety of having those instead of just
another type of enemy.
goblins.
Yeah. There was one little moment though I had when I went up on my snow journey that I've spoken about multiple times already in this cast, where I came across this little plateau, snowy bit, and I noticed like there was lots of like arrows on the ground, and I was like, "What's all this about?" And I was picking them up, and as I was going around, and I was getting closer and closer to like where more and more of the arrows were appearing, and then I got to the edge like of this plateau, and suddenly like from this higher cliff face 3 soldier constructs just started to try to shoot me with arrows. I'm like, oh no. It's like
Yes.
it's like I've fallen into their trap.
You're like, ooh, piece of candy. Ooh, piece of candy.
But that's exactly what happens. yeah.
That's excellent.
We've got a couple of other returning faces as well that you'll probably run into during your travels here. Namely Choo-Choos.
And the mighty geese.
Yep. Yeah. Classic one-hit enemies.
Which I suppose at this stage, considering you were fighting mostly with twigs and sticks, that you're thankful for that rather than a Lionel turning up or something. There's one other like piece of, like there's also one other piece of like wildlife that I noticed as I was roaming about. Did you guys run into any of the grassland ostriches when you were
Yeah, I
traveling?
love
yeah,
those
yeah.
guys.
They're so manic.
It's
Once or twice, I
wild
think
as
one
soon as
just
they
like
see you.
ran into me and knocked me down.
Yeah.
They're little agents of chaos. I love them.
Yeah, there's actually like a little bit
Yeah.
like on the Great Sky Island where like it's another kind of construct, like an NPC construct, teaching you how to hunt. And it
Yeah.
lets you hunt those little birds that you just mentioned.
And what's really cool is you'll run into these guys like throughout your whole travels across the Great Sky Island. Like there's different constructs that are still fulfilling objectives and goals and think obviously still try to keep the place running. But they also serve as like little mini tutorials as well, like for parts of the game if you want to engage with them. Like there's a wood cutting one, a hunting one, like you said, Jas. And what I like as well is if usually nearby these constructs, you'll usually find Rauru, who's just kind of like watching them. Maybe comment a little bit about the lore of what they're up to, and the fact that he's created the constructs to maintain this island and such. And it very much reminded me of how you would run into the old man a lot at the start of Breath of the Wild and the Great Plateau. Like very similar vibes.
There's one line he said that was really nice, where he said something like, "It makes me sad to see that they're still working, even though there's no one left for them to work for."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Like you see Raru, like kind of, he's around them, like he's a ghostly figure, and he's kind of moping around about the situation.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a melancholy air about him, right? Whereas the old man, I suppose because you don't know at the start he's a spirit, whereas Rauru he is a spirit. The old man just had a bit more of a jolly air about him, in a strange way.
Yeah, well, we talked about this last week with the old man. You didn't know he was a ghost till the end, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas Rauru, they make no attempt to hide it.
Yes.
So yeah, the old man was putting on a little like, "Oh, I'm just a simple country old man in the mountains," just because he was testing to see if you had your memories. And then you get to the end, and he's like, "Yeah, by the way, I'm the king of Hyrule. The world's ended. You got some work to do, son." Whereas Rauru from the start is like, "Oh, hey, buddy, I had to replace your arm. Everything's gone to shit. Good luck, I guess." And plus, like, the king of Hyrule, he's been dead for like 100 years.
Yes.
Rauru's coming back to this island after being dead for like millennia.
Yeah.
So there's a very different kind of melancholy for him.
One thing that, just while we're speaking about kind of just generally wandering about before we get to, path to the next shrine, one thing that we haven't spoken about that is a big part of, I think, of the whole mood and atmosphere as you're going across the Great Sky Island is the alarmingly loud bell noise that triggers as you travel around. Like the first time that happened, I was really spooked. I'm like, what the hell is that? What's going on?
Yeah, the chimes from the Temple of Time.
Yeah.
And the constructs talk about like that chime is what tells them to like stop and start working or whatever.
Yeah,
That's
I think
right, yeah.
Raru mentions that as well somewhere also.
And you can actually see them
like the start and end to the day of the cycle or something like that.
You can see them move, like when the evening bell triggers, they'll move from whatever job they were doing to like almost little like charging stations, I suppose, like nearby, and kind of go into that dormant state where they're just a little cylinder, basically.
A little bell, really. Like,
Yeah. They remind me of Pokemon Bronzong when they turn into that state. But,
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, just like a little ancient bell.
Mm-hmm. But it's cool just seeing the kind of day-night cycle, obviously, actually triggered with the bell and such as well. But yeah, I had no idea what it was the first time it happened. I thought something was triggering, like I thought I was like activated a secret tutorial area boss fight or something. I was very alarmed.
Yeah. I don't think I ever had anything like that. I just was It just felt like part of the atmosphere for me.
Yeah, I just thought it was like maybe like part of the music until I found obviously Raru mention about it. It's the Temple of Time, like making the noise.
And then our next step is just a little sailing across a river. Just slap 2 logs together, give them a sail.
Yep.
Easier said than done.
Well, if you know how to rotate, it's not too bad, isn't it?
Yeah, when I did it yesterday, it was a piece of piss. But
it's not the rotating that's the problem. It's the activating your boat, because sometimes you stick your boat together and then you decimate the thing when you try and activate the fan and end up spinning around in a circle like I did.
Well, this isn't the fan one yet. We'll get to that a bit later.
Oh,
this
I
is
thought we were talking about like sailing across the river, right?
yeah. But this isn't the fan one. This is just the one where you put a sail on your boat.
It's like a big, massive body of water you have to go across. It's quite a big one. It's not the smaller river.
And there's a strong breeze. So
yeah,
once you have a sail, it goes well. In
there
fact,
was a sail.
Yesterday I had to make.
I think I just straight up like used the fan, like,
without me.
unless I'm thinking of a different area.
No, yeah, there's a second river later where you get a fan. You don't have a fan on this one.
Right. I don't remember that at all. It's just like that fan, my fan boat. It's like clearly like lodged in my memory.
Well, yeah, this one is very easy and forgettable.
And it's very close as well if you want to go and revisit to our next shrine, which is well, actually, before then, I think there is a cave actually that we go to before we get to the shrine, if I remember rightly.
Yes, there's a cave, very small cave next to the shrine. Although now I'm wondering, did we have to go into the shrine and make a hammer before we could get into the cave? I can't remember.
I think that's right. I don't know if the cave happens. Yeah, I think
the
the
cave
cave happens
is right
after
next
the
to the. It's right next to the shrine, but it's covered up with breakable blocks, so I don't think you can get
Yes.
into it until you do the shrine.
Yes, which would make sense. So we do move into the shrine then, which is Enisa Shrine. The ability to combine. And in there we are given our next power, Fuse.
Yes.
What's our thoughts on Fuse?
I'm glad Fuse, I think I said this before, is not as complex as Ultra Hand. You just hold down the button and you attach it to one of your weapons.
Mm-hmm.
It's very useful, but it's not so fiddly. Whereas when I saw early like screenshots and it's like Link with a sword, I was worried that I was going to be having to construct weapons the same way we construct everything else. And that sounded like a pain in the butt.
I like that naming convention they go with though, like when you are just combining like two spears together with the fuse ability.
Yeah.
And it's just like, straight up calls it a spear. Like it's brilliant. And then when you start coming up with like later in the game, when you start coming up with all the like crazy combinations, like it's always fun seeing the eventual name.
Well, I think both of you spoke about how when you first got Ultra Hand, you tried to glue things together with Ultra Hand.
Yeah, I mentioned that on I think the First Impressions cast. Like I was so confused. I was like, this isn't working. Like, why is it not letting me pick up my weapons? They just break every time because of I was connecting them together with Ultra Hand. And basically gluing them to the ground.
I think so the way Fuse works is, I think when you're using Fuse on weapons, I think it's, it can be funny, like just gluing a big spear to another big spear, get this massive long super pike.
A rusty claymore to your shield. Like,
yeah.
This serves no purpose, but it looks good.
But I think for like just speaking solely about your main arm weapon, I think the applications of Fuse throughout the game maybe aren't as interesting as what you can do with attaching stuff to your shield, and certainly what you can do attaching things to arrows. But attaching stuff to weapons mostly is, I think, damage, pure damage, and durability as well.
Apart from making like useful tools.
Yes, so this is how you get like a hammer or an axe or what have you.
Yeah. So it does change things up in that way, and it makes the weapon durability thing. It changes up how that dynamic works in a fight, because you're like, oh, I'm low on damage, but what if I quickly attach this rock to my sword and get a few extra hits in, stuff like that.
So yeah, like making tools. I mean, that's the first obstacle you have to get through in the shrine. Is it'll fuse a boulder to a stick to destroy a wall. So it does teach you that as being one of the key uses of fuse. But you've also got, like later in the game, obviously, you'll be attaching monster parts to your weapons to maybe attach a horn onto a spear, and you've then got a more powerful spear, or maybe an elemental horn to create like a thunder weapon or a fire weapon or what have you.
Well, I was pretty excited when I realised just sticking a ruby on a sword, you've basically got the magic rod from the previous game.
Yes. Yeah. So there are definitely some cool weapon fuses, but it's things you can do with, again, maybe not so much the shield, although there are, maybe we won't speak about this yet, but there are some certainly interesting things you can attach to shields. It's arrows.
A couple of things. Last playthrough.
But it's arrows, I think, that where it really shines. And the first thing it teaches you is using flame fruit, which is a new, or fire fruit. Is that what they're called?
Fire fruit, yeah. Fire fruit.
Which is a new item, I believe, in Tears of the Kingdom. And if you attach that to an arrow, you've got a fire arrow. Right, and pure and simple, easy as that.
It's a game changer. One of the complaints I've seen about this game, and I do kind of agree, it puts all of your items on one list. So if you want to get to like your flame arrows, you've got to scroll through like every apple, every piece of meat, every monster part.
It does have there is a sort button.
There's a sort button, but it would be nice if you could make shorter custom lists.
I said, like I think I tweeted last night that I would definitely prefer if they had like a way to have a custom option,
like a favourite list or something.
Set your own favourites,
Yeah.
Like, because most of the time, like it goes by fuse attack power, by type, and then by most used. And the most used one, like you're still need, like if you're like really wanting to find like something maybe you've not used a whole lot of, like you are scrolling through a big old list and it just gets worse the longer you play. Yeah.
I think I've not had a huge problem because most used is more or less covered what I would need for the most part. But then you find that odd rare item that you're trying to sift through this big old list, and it's a bit frustrating. But one thing I will say is I can take that over the offset of having to manage, 4 or 5 different ammo types for arrows.
Yeah.
The fact you just got one set of arrows, and then that's all you need to worry about. Then everything else is just stuff you pick up as you go through your journey. And it's a fact that different bits of materials can act as the same purpose, so you can maybe attach like a piece of flame choo-choo jelly, which will also serve as a fire arrow, or you've got the fire fruit. There's different ways around it, and I think that's just really cool.
Just a good way, like just good utility to use within your like battles and just general kind of roaming about.
And we spoke about the keys earlier on. If you were fortunate enough to find and kill a keys and get a keys eyeball, you attach that to an arrow. Homing arrow, baby.
Don't have to aim.
Yep, exactly.
I read that. I haven't actually used it yet.
Oh, it's so useful for some enemies, I tell you.
It's good for like if an enemy's like behind a bit of cover or something, you can just arc it over the wall, and the Kisai just over the wall and tracks it.
Yep.
Nice.
Into a headshot.
Flying enemies as well, no bother. Yeah, it's very useful.
Yeah. Certain situations, most of the time, like I don't feel like I need to use it because I play with the default like gyro aim, which gives you great aiming ability anyway.
Yeah, same.
And folks, if you're playing along at home for your James Adaster Stewart bingo card, that's a technically gyro aim.
I love it. It's the best.
I know, man. It just always amuses me.
The other little thing in this dungeon, which may be, the shrine, which maybe is a clue that how the game's going to be a bit different to Breath of the Wild, you get a small key.
I think those were in Breath of the Wild in some, like, maybe only a couple of shrines, but they were there.
Okay. I mean, you could be right, but yeah, I really don't remember them.
It was really rare, and that's why I'm like, I think I might be misremembering, but I'm sure they were in Breath of the Wild, and I'm sure like when it turned up in a random shrine, I was like, what? Small key? Definitely an odd one.
Yeah.
Also, I suppose, boss of this dungeon, if you want to call it that, is a different type of construct. We have to fight a captain construct to get to the statue at the end here. And the captain constructs, they have one of our powers as well. They can also use fuse.
Yes, they're mostly just seem like bigger, tougher constructs. But then, yeah, they do. They shoot out like a little beam, and they can drag a weapon over to themselves and fuse it. So yeah, they do have that little thing going for them.
I love it. They've added that to like, and that kind of stretches to like all the enemies in the game that I've like found so far. Is like, I think it would have been a bit lame if only your character like has the ability to fuse items together.
Yeah, almost every enemy has a weapon that's fused.
You'd be fighting weaker enemies if they never like. So it's really clever, like that all the enemies within the game also use like fuse abilities or combine things in certain ways.
And they use that to teach you some cool combinations as well.
Mm-hmm. I think the captain constructs that always struggle with me when I fight them is the ones that end up getting like a flame emitter.
Oh yeah, don't let them get that. Like if it's close by, like stun them before that happens.
Yeah, and they just become real menaces. Fortunately, this initial one, I think you can get like a spiky ball, which is still pretty threatening, but at least it's not a huge issue.
Right. And then that brings us to the end of this shrine, and probably to the end of this week's episode.
I think that's a good place to call it, yeah. I think if we go any longer, we're going to have a bumper episode, and why not split up the Sky Islands? I think that's a good idea. On next week's edition of the report, we're going to be finishing our journeys across the Sky Island as we move towards the next shrine and return to the Temple of Time to hopefully rendezvous with Princess Zelda. So make sure you join us for that. Until then, Luke, do your thing.
Yeah, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you can find us on Twitter or Facebook at Hyrule Field Pod. Please do pop in, say hello, give us a follow. It just makes us feel good to know that human beings are listening. Like, it's one thing to have a number on the downloads figures, but it's nice if I can, like, put names and faces to it. But also, we're a new podcast, so please rate and review, like and subscribe. Whatever you're using to listen to this, be that Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, just hit, the appropriate like button or review button. Click the highest possible number that you can. And help us find more listeners. It'll be good. It'll be good for the show that you're listening to. Like, the more people we have listening, the more we might get some user interaction. We might have some discussion about stuff later on in the game. And also, the more incentive there is for us to keep doing it. Although I've got a feeling we're going to anyway, because I need an outlet to talk about this game for a couple hours a week for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
And if you want to help support the podcast, keep it online, you can head to patreon.com/podcastio-podcastius. And even if you're not planning on giving us any money, head on over to that link, and there you can find the other podcasts that me and my pals create. There's Luke Loves Pokemon, where I talk about a different Pokemon family every week. There's 100-odd episodes of Monster Mash, which was me and Jay and Jass's previous podcast about Monster Hunter. There's the Game Show, a game show about games. There's Films and Filth, a podcast where we're talking about the top 100 and bottom 100 films on IMDb. And there's Twilight Zone podcasts and all kinds of other stuff as well. So why not go over there and check it out?
And Jas, why don't you leave us this week with a sage word of advice?
Sage word of advice. Yaha!
I like it. Well, until then, catch us next time.
Bye.
Cheerio.